Year of Stories 2022 Community Fund. We're live on YouTube, and you may be watching this later, or you could be listening on Camglen Radio. If you're watching this live, you're very welcome to put your questions, and we'll try to incorporate this into the discussion this evening. 2022 has been designated Scotland's Year of Stories. This is a year in which stories inspired by, created or written in Scotland will be showcased and celebrated, and this event is no different. Our love of stories is hardwired into all of us and is the strongest way we can connect with each other. My name's Kat Gibson and I host the Wednesday lunchtime show here on Camglen Radio. And the author beside me has been a sports journalist for a national newspaper and has written five novels about four about a private investigator, and her latest book, The Dark Room, is all about Leonard, who's got an interest in processing old films and photographs, and he develops a film in which there's the body of a murdered woman, but it turns out that this woman had been murdered 5 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome our special guest, Lisa Gray. So, thank you so much for joining us, Lisa, and it's great to have you here to talk about your standalone book, The Dark Room. But how did you get into writing, and what made you change from sports journalism to writing books and novels?
Well, I think before I really got interested in writing, I was always a big reader. That's where the kind of love of books came from as a child. I would be round all the libraries. I'd drag my poor dad round every library in Glasgow in search of like the next Sweet Valley High book or Judy Blume book. And I spent many, many happy hours just along the road in Rutherglen Library. And at one point, I enjoyed like books and reading so much that I actually wanted to work in a library when I grew up. I really loved the idea of using that wee pen thing to scan out the books and stamp the books, and I even did work experience in a library as well at one point. But I think it was maybe when I was around 10 or 11, I kind of got into the idea that I really wanted to do some writing as well. But at that point, it still just never occurred to me that I could be like Judy Blume or R.L. Stein or Stephen King or Dean Koontz or all these people that whose books I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I thought, but I quite like the idea of getting paid to write, so I'll be a journalist when I grow up. I'll go to college and I'll write for Smash Hits or Just 17, and I'll get to interview, take that, and all these famous people. So, long story short, I did become a journalist, but I'd never worked for Smash Hits. I'd interviewed Robbie Williams or Mark Owen or anybody, so I kind of fell into being a sports reporter by mistake, kind of instead. Pretty much just because I liked football, I enjoyed football, and I knew other people had got a wee kind of opportunity to cover the kind of lower division football matches for a national newspaper. So I thought, I can do that. So I phoned up the Daily Record one day and asked to speak to the sports editor, and says, I could cover some football matches for you. And he says, okay, I'll give you Partick Thistle tomorrow night, and if you mess it up, you'll never get another, you'll never work again, basically. And it was just 20 years later that kind of ended up being a career kind of by accident. But I think I knew after 20 years of sitting outside freezing cold at Dens Park and Firhill and all these places, Scottish winters aren't the best for that job. People think it's glamorous, but it really isn't. But during that time, I'd started going to like the crime festivals. There's a big one in Harrogate, and Scotland's got its own one as well now, Bloody Scotland in Stirling. It's been going for 10 years. So I would go along to these festivals, and I would sit and I would listen to panels with Denise Mina and Chris Brookmeyer, who you spoke to just recently, and Ian Rankin and all these people. And sometimes you'd even get to kind of chat to them in the bar and offer to buy them a drink or whatever, and just kind of find out how they kind of get involved in crime writing. And I just thought, do you know what, that's what I really want to do. I kind of going back to that feeling when I would go to the library and I would check out the books, and the enjoyment I got from reading books. I thought I would love to be able to do that for people to read the stories that I could write.
Was it easier for you to approach people like Denise Mina and Chris Brookmeyer, being as at least you worked in journalism as opposed to somebody who's just read their book, if you see what I mean?
Oh no, I mean, I'm probably like the shyest journalist you could probably ever have met. It's probably another reason why in the end up I preferred the idea of writing books rather than being a journalist and having to interview people. I much prefer just kind of shutting myself away in my living room at my desk and just kind of getting into that wee world with all the characters and spending time with them. But
so you eventually decided enough of standing outside Broadwood waiting for the latest score and listening to sports sounds or whatever, and you decided, I'm going to start writing a book. You don't set any of your stories in Scotland. What on earth made you decide to go to California or Manhattan for the storylines?
Well, I suppose it was a couple of reasons. As I said, it was mostly American authors that I read growing up. I've never read an Enid Blyton book, which I think is probably a terrible thing for a UK crime writer to admit.
Can you imagine a reader saying that? Never read Enid Blyton. Honestly, what, all that lashings of ginger beer and picnics and off to Kirrin Island? And just honest, a story that I tell everybody about Enid Blyton is I had a child who was not very into reading, and I sat him down, and the very first story is Dick and Julian are talking in boarding school, and he says, what have they done? He thought they were in Borstal. Something totally different. And when we got to Aunt Fanny, I had to accept, no, we've just totally forget this. This is a non-starter. We're not going anywhere with this. So how else do you get your inspiration? What inspires you to write?
Yeah, I mean, it can be anything and everything. A lot of the ideas for the books actually come from real life stories. So Thin Air, it was more a sort of like general one, because the story of Thin Air is about a private investigator who specialises in finding missing people, and then she finds out one day that she's been missing herself for 25 years. She was abducted as a child and she didn't know that people had been looking for her all that time. So that really just came from like these quite tragic real life stories about children that are missing, and the years go by and you don't know what's happened to them. They could still be alive and you hope that they're still alive and they're being well cared for somewhere. And it was just that idea that I thought, what would happen if they came across a photograph, a missing persons poster, and they recognised that they were that child? So that was kind of the spark of the idea for the first book, and pretty much all the other ones since then, it's maybe like a kind of real life crime that's quite interesting, and I just take the spark of that idea and then I turn it into something totally different to come up with something a bit quirky and unusual for Jessica's adventures.
And why do you think there are quite so many crime writers in Scotland? Because you've got Val McDermott and Ian Rankin doing the East Coast, you've got Denise and Chris pretty much sewing up the West Coast, Peter May's doing the Lewis trilogy. There seems to be a plethora of crime writers. What do you think it is about the Scottish psyche that sort of it makes it sort of more important to write about crime and mysteries? It's
maybe the same reason that there's so many Scandinavian crime writers as well. If you live in a small country and it's dark and it's cold, it maybe just lends itself to writing these kind of dark stories. And I think also Scottish people are known for their humour. And I think when you write dark stories, when you write crime, you've got to have humour in there as well. You've got to have some kind of light relief in. And I think Scottish people are quite good at doing that kind of mix of the sort of darkness and the lightness as well. And also just think in general, like Scottish people for generations, we do tend to kind of punch above our weight when it comes to inventing things or creating things that, like whiskey, penicillin, the telephone, the TV. It's I don't know, I think we kind of think, oh, I can have a go at that. And we do punch above our weight, and this is why we've ended up with some of the best crime writers in the world, in my opinion. People like Val McDermott and Ian Rankin. So I very, very briefly described the plot of The Dark Room. I was trying to do it in such a way so that I wasn't giving the actual storyline away. But do you want to tell us a little bit about Leonard and Martha and their story? So Leonard Blaylock was a senior crime reporter for a newspaper in New York, and 5 years ago he had the world at his feet. He had a beautiful young fiancée who was a radio reporter at that time. He had a great social life, great career, great circle of friends, nice apartment in Manhattan. And then he had a tendency to have his head turned by, shall we say, a pretty face. So 5 years ago, he had a very ill-advised one-night stand with a woman who approached him in a bar one night, and it went disastrously wrong, and his life kind of spiralled after that. He basically thought he had witnessed her death and he was implicated, and he fled the scene. So fast forward 5 years, and he now lives a very lonely existence. He's a freelance journalist who works from home, and one of the features he was working on was these people who have a strange hobby where they like to buy the forgotten and discarded camera films of complete strangers. So they'll pick up these spools at car boot sales and flea markets and things like that, and they get an enjoyment from developing these spools and seeing what's basically going to show up on the picture. So Leonard kind of gets involved in this, and a wee bit weird, he kind of tapes the photographs to his bedroom wall of the people in these pictures, and he kind of regards them as if like, they're his friends, and he gives them names and things like that. So, but then one day in his darkroom, he develops a roll of film, and it shows the murder of a young woman. She's quite clearly been stabbed in a hotel room, but the kind of interesting thing is it's the same woman he thought he saw die in different circumstances 5 years earlier. So he obviously knows something was really amiss that night 5 years ago. Nothing was what it seemed. So he enlists the help of a woman called Martha, who's a photographer that he speaks to online because she's into the same kind of mystery film hobby as him. So they basically just set off to find out what happened to the woman now and what happened 5 years ago.
So that's a very good place, I think, maybe to start to give us maybe a reading from the book then.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just from the first chapter, so I'll just kind of jump in part way through. So this is explaining the day, the first time Leonard buys the mystery film online, and he goes to like a photo printing place, like, sort of like Max Spielman in the arcade, and then he realises that this is maybe not a good idea when it's like camera film you've bought online, you don't know what's on it. And just for a wee bit of context, the first image that he puts on his bedroom wall is a woman that he calls Angela. So if you're wondering who Angela is in the story. So the photo printing place was a family-owned business that shared its premises with a dry cleaners, which struck Leonard as an odd combination. Did their customers usually get a comforter or a suit cleaned while picking up the vacation pics, seeing as they were in there anyway? It was like those people who put slices of pineapple on their pizzas. They were both food, but that didn't make it right. He dropped off the 2 film rolls and ordered the 1-hour service. Then he went around the corner to a coffee shop where he was interviewing an actress from a daytime soap opera. The interview dragged on forever. The only thing the actress loved more than herself was the opportunity to talk about herself. Her plumped up lips moved and her hands gesticulated, and Leonard tried to nod in all the right places like he used to do with his buddies' boring photos. He couldn't focus on a single word she was saying. He didn't give a rat's ass about her exciting new storyline or that she would be appearing in an off-Broadway production later in the year. His head was full of what might be on those rolls of film. 90 minutes later, with 2 double-shot lattes churning in his gut, Leonard practically ran the 3 blocks to the store, pushing his way past passers-by, nerves jangling from the caffeine and the anticipation. It was a pleasantly warm day, early summer, the temperature hovering around the low 70s, blue skies and lots of flesh on show. By the time he reached the photo place, he was sweating like a criminal in a church. Leonard finally understood in that moment the appeal of the mystery film. It was all about the gamble, the element of risk, the not knowing what the outcome would be, but hoping for the best anyway. A bit like those people who religiously played the lottery twice a week, or the gamblers who kept the slot machines fed in the casinos, or the seniors who visited the bingo halls in Queens and Brooklyn on the weekend. Anything could be on those rolls, and that was the thrill of it. Leonard pushed open the door with eager anticipation, the electronic beep announcing his arrival as he stepped inside. He already had the ticket in his hand. Then he stopped dead, sneakers rooted to the carpet. He felt as if his heart had just stopped. Anything could be on those rolls. Why hadn't he thought of that before? Idiot. Half a dozen terrible possibilities crashed through his brain in quick succession, each one worse than the last. Nudie pics, hardcore porn, up the skirt shots, A long lens trained on a teenager's bedroom. Oh God, something awful happening to little kids. The woman behind the counter, who had been all smiles earlier, frowned at him. Her lips were a thin pink line of disapproval. He glanced around anxiously, expecting a burly security guard to appear at any second. Did photo stores/dry cleaners have security guards? Did they need them? They did if perverts and weirdos wanted their sick photos developed there. Maybe the counter assistant had called the cops already. Maybe they were on their way while Leonard stood there giving the statues in Central Park a run for their money. He considered turning around and getting the hell out of there, but he'd paid by credit card, hadn't he? It wouldn't take the NYPD's finest too long to track him down. What if he was arrested? What if they fingerprinted him? Once they had his prints, he was finished, life over. They would find a match in their system and they would know what he had done. Then the woman asked, "Are you okay, hon?" And Leonard realised with a flood of relief that the frown and the grim expression were out of concern rather than disgust. He mumbled something about the warm weather making him feel woozy for a moment before thrusting the ticket at her. He shoved his quarry into his backpack next to his notepad and voice recorder. One of the envelopes was depressingly thin, the other enticingly thick. As he made his way towards the nearest subway station, Leonard told himself he'd wait until he got back to the apartment before looking at the photographs, just in case there was something bad on them. The train car was stuffy and busy. The sweat from his back stuck his shirt to his plastic seat and made his skin itch. His beard was damp. As the train picked up speed, the distinct, dirty, warm smell of the subway became even more pungent in the humidity. Leonard removed the envelopes from his bag, his fingers leaving damp marks on the glossy paper. He wouldn't look just yet. Best to wait. He tried to distract himself by reading the overhead ads for an energy drink and the perfect mattress in a new Don Winslow novel he'd already purchased. He idly wondered if he needed a new mattress. A handful of passengers disembarked at the next station. He heard the safety announcement and the doors sucking shut. The train was on the move again, accelerating fast through a tunnel, screeching and shaking. Leonard opened the fattest envelope. The first 3 prints had been spoiled by the flash. The next was a photo of a tiled floor, the one after that a ceiling, then 2 almost identical images of a glistening turquoise swimming pool, someone's foot just in the shot. The 8th photo was a winning lottery ticket, the coins dropping into the slot machine's tray, a full row on the bingo card, blonde hair, blue eyes, gap-toothed smile, white dress, white wine, swallow tattoo, little yellow blob halo, Angel Angela. Leonard stared at the photo for a long time. When he finally looked up, he realised he had missed his stop.
Well done. Thank you. So I think one of the first questions I'll need to ask, I think that's somebody coming for Leonard now. So I think one of the first things I have to ask is, why did you decide to stop writing Jessica Showlands to do all about Leonard?
Well, it was really, this was back in the summer of 2019. Remember those heady days before the pandemic and the world basically kind of stopped. And I'd actually read an article about these people who have this hobby where they buy mystery film and they develop it themselves and they go online onto Reddit and they share the photographs and talk to each other about them. And I thought, that's such a strange and unusual hobby.
It's such an old-fashioned type of holiday. I mean, I remember vividly the sort of excitement of having the sort of the one-time camera type thing, and you would hand it in and then you would wait, you would get your photographs back, and you discovered about at least half of these shots are blurry and you can't tell who you've taken the picture of, never mind what it's supposed to be.
It was always the excitement, wasn't it? I mean, initially it would be about a week you had to make before you could get like the 1 hour service, and then everybody would be fighting over the envelope saying, let me see that, and people would go, oh my God, look at my expression in that, or you've got the red eye, or like Uncle Bobby's been cut out.
There was no Snapchat filters then, was there? You know, we couldn't just edit things, photo editor hadn't been created.
So I quite liked the old-fashioned aspect of this. So the kind of first thought I had after reading this article was I quite fancy giving this a go, and then quickly I realised what Leonard realised, buying camera film from a complete stranger on eBay and then rocking up to the local boots and handing it over, maybe not such a good idea. So then from there I thought, actually that could maybe be the beginnings of an idea for a book. But I knew it wouldn't really fit in with the kind of Jessica Shaw series. It's more to do with finding missing people. So it was just from there, this character of this guy who had kind of gotten himself involved in this hobby, and then one day the inevitable happens and he develops a roll of film that's got something really, really bad on it. And that's so it just kind of came from there. I felt it had to be a new setting and a new character and a new cast of characters, really.
Yeah, and the way that you do it isn't necessarily as chapters, it's all from people's point of view. It's from Leonard's point of view and Martha's point of view and other different characters.
Yeah, so that's the same in the Jessica Shaw books as well. So Jessica Shaw is the main character. She has the most chapters, but the way I always set the books out is that I like to give the perspectives of other key characters in the books. And one of the things I always do in it is I always have chapters from the point of view of the victim leading up to the event. Just because I think it's that kind of show rather than tell thing. It's better if you can actually show people the events, but also I feel it's quite important that the victims in the book have a voice, that they're not just a body, that in a crime to be investigated, that you get to know them as people beforehand and you care about them. So there is, even in this book, there's one chapter from the point of view of the woman who's dead in the photograph that gives you quite a bit of insight into her and her sort of motivations in all of this, without giving away too much.
And why do you feel so passionate about storytelling? What is it about storytelling that really appeals to you?
I think it's just, it's the same as watching a movie. It's going away into a different world when you need a wee break from the day-to-day life that we have. When you go out to work, you can forget about work or even family life for a while. You can take yourself away and you can just go into this other world that someone's created and just lose yourself in it. And I think, again, going back to the pandemic, I think we needed that more than ever. I think it wasn't a surprise that there was, even though the bookstores were shut, there was a big increase in terms of like people downloading books onto Kindles and things like that, because I think people just really needed that escape and just to disappear into another world for a couple of hours.
And when you're talking about the pandemic, I was speaking to, I think it was Teresa Talbot, who does writing stories as well, and she was saying, I can't write just now during the pandemic, just nope, that wasn't happening for her. But you didn't find that. You were quite enjoying writing about stories.
Well, right at the start of the first lockdown, it was actually edits on, I'm trying to remember what book it would have been.
I think it was Bad Memory.
No, Bad Memory was out just because it might have been Dark Hour. Again, I can't even remember in terms of my own books. So I pretty much had no choice. I had like a deadline, I had the edits in front of me, and I actually found that a really good way, because I'm like such an anxious warrior type person that I would have literally just sat and watched the news the whole time and stressed out about everything. So I found that really good, that I could just escape into another world where the pandemic hadn't happened. I didn't have to think about hand sanitizer or 2 meters social distancing or face masks or any that kind of stuff. And then when it came to actually having to sit down and write the next book after that, I found the same thing. It was a nice kind of escape from the everyday and the worry to just jump into that world, because that was a conscious decision that I made as well, that I wasn't going to address the pandemic in the books. I know a lot of people did, they felt that was necessary, but I felt I wanted to do it as like the present day would be a kind of undefined present day, so it could be before or after the pandemic, but I felt I wanted to kind of dodge that whole subject.
One of the things I discovered, and please go home and check your social media accounts, is the amount of information that is suddenly available on Google. Because part of the way that Leonard and Martha find things is by basically using the internet and using people's social media accounts against them, kind of thing.
Yep, and this was something I had to do as well, because people often say, why do you set books in America? And part of the reason was I've got family that live in California, and I'd been out to visit them like years before I wrote a book, and I thought, if I set books in America, I'll have a reason to go to America to do these research trips, and this is going to be...
Is that why you wrote one in Venice Beach? Come on.
It is, but unfortunately I had all these plans, and then the small matter of a global pandemic happened, and I ended up sitting in my flat in Rutherglen, on Google Street Maps with a wee yellow man dropping them on all the maps and pretending that I was driving down all these like American highways. So just being, from my point of view, it was a good thing that there's so much available online, because unfortunately the glamorous research trips have still not happened.
What advice would you give to budding authors? What's the one piece of advice you wish somebody had given to you, or did give to you maybe?
Well, I would say probably two bits of advice, and the first one is, if you want to write, you have to read, because a lot of people that want to become writers, they'll sign up for creative writing classes and they'll buy all these kind of craft books, how to write. And I never done any of that, but what I did do was I was a voracious reader, and you would be surprised if you read widely in the genre that you want to write in, how much you absorb subconsciously. So you pick up all those beats, and when you would be expecting a twist or how to end a chapter on a cliffhanger, things like that. But the other thing I would say is, if you want to write, sit down and write. And that sounds really like obvious advice, but I spent about 5 years going to all these crime festivals and meeting other authors and budding authors, and a lot of them in that time get agents and they get publishing deals, and I was too scared to sit down and do it. I didn't want to be the one that was going to be the failure. I thought, if it's all still in my head, if it's a dream, the dream hasn't failed. So it's actually having the confidence to sit down and make the time and get it finished, because you can't edit an empty, a blank page. Yeah. So once you've got something there, you can do something with it.
I can't remember what month it is, but there's a particular month, because part of the radio show is I try and find National Awareness Days, and there's an actual month that is dedicated to writing a novel.
It's this month. NaNoWriMo. It's like the month of November, where you can sign up and you go online and you have like a username and you set a target, and it is pretty much to write a novel in a month, which is a great way for people that do want to write a book, and they maybe think, I don't have the confidence, or I don't have the time, and this is a good way to do it. As you say, 1 month, just
to sit down and do it. One of the questions I think I would like to ask any sort of writer is, have you ever sat down and you've started writing the story and you've discovered you've maybe written yourself into the metaphorical blind alley, or there's no way out and you can't see, I've painted myself into a corner here, what do I do next? Or how do you get over that?
Well, the thing is, I'm a planner, and I don't know if it comes from being a journalist as well, because people like writers tend to fall into the two categories of planners and pantsers. So pantsers are, they fly by the seat of their pants. They start off with an idea in a blank page and they just basically run with it. That terrifies me. I think these people must be psychopaths.
I think you find Chris Brookmeyer's one of them.
Yeah. Don't tell him I called him a psychopath. But
it's on YouTube.
But I'm the complete opposite. I have to know the ending before I can write the first word of the book. And I cover my wall with colour-coded post-it notes, and I do chapter outlines before I start as well.
Sorry, who's the psychopath? Sorry, did you just hear that? Colour-coded post-it notes?
I do draw the line at Excel spreadsheets and things like that. I'm not quite that bad. So I have a roadmap before I start. And as I say, I need to know the ending, but sometimes that can change. I mean, I give myself permission once you start writing and you get to know the characters and you get further into the story. You might have like some twists that you've already got in your mind, but then another twist could come, and that's really cool when that happens. So the book that's coming out next year, it's called To Die For. It's another standalone. So that's one where the killer did actually change before the end of the book. So it's good fun when you can surprise yourself that way, but I don't like to be surprised in the way that you say that you write 50,000 words and then you're like, where the hell am I going with this? I've got no idea what's going to happen. Because even in the dark room, the final line in the book, which isn't really a spoiler, is the final line is just in case. Mm-hmm. And that was on the outline before I sat down to write the book, and it's still in the book right now.
Okay.
So.
I think we'll open it up now to the audience to ask questions.
Is it long enough? I believe it is.
Hi, I just finished the new book yesterday, and I noticed at the end in the author note you said there was some, what's the word, Easter eggs for the Jessica Shaw series, but I didn't get them, so I was just wondering if you would enlighten me.
I'm trying to remember what they were now. There was a reference to a photograph by a photographer called Tony Shaw, who was Jessica Shaw's dad.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a detective in the book called Detective Jackie Rossi, and she has a conversation with a colleague, a detective called Tommy DeLuca, and he pops up in the Dark Highway book as one of Jessica's old flings. And he's actually mentioned in the dark room as having had his nose broken. It was Jessica that broke his nose when she found out that he had a wife at the time. And I'm trying to remember, there was a third one, and I can't remember what it was.
I couldn't remember, and I was like, I'm going to ask this tonight.
So I know that was two of them. I'm just trying to remember. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know what the third one was.
Hi, I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I'm halfway through the book, so I'm awfully glad you didn't do the spoiler. I would have been wild upset. My question was going to be about how you organise your thoughts, how you keep the character, how you sort of separate them out, all come together in a storyline, but you've answered with post-its. So my question's a bit redundant. I've always heard that the difficulty in book writing is getting published. Could you tell me how that went for you? And could I just finally say thank you? Rutherglen needs lots of people like you, good authors. So my question is, how did you, because you're published on Amazon, and did you have to go through a lot of steps to get there? How did that develop?
So for different people, there could be different routes. So people that want to self-publish can do that on one of the self-publishing platforms with Amazon, but I had decided I wanted to go down a more kind of traditional route, because I actually had, the first book I actually had published was years ago. It was a football book, and that was with a small publisher in Scotland, and I just sent the idea direct to the publisher at that time, and that book got published. When it came to the crime books, I wanted to do the more sort of traditional route, so it was a case of writing the manuscript, drawing up a list of literary agents who would be interested in that sort of style of book, and then basically sending the first 3 chapters in the outline off to the agents and getting in what they call the slush pile, which is, as you can imagine, they get many submissions. And I was quite lucky because a friend of mine had an agent, and she read the first draft of Thin Air and she liked it, and I had sent it to the agent and they hadn't got round to reading it, and she basically says, I've read this book, it's really good, I think you should read it. So I was really quite lucky, and then from there it's just a process of the agent takes over and they approach publishers, and the one that came back was Amazon Publishing, so that wasn't the self-published side of it, that was the sort of publishing arm, so it's their crime and thriller side of the business. It's called Thomas and Mercer. So I was just really lucky that it kind of worked out. But I mean, for different people, there could be different routes. Some people want to self-publish. Some people just want to write for themselves, just for that enjoyment. They maybe don't even want anybody else to see it, or they just want family and friends to see it. So it's quite a personal thing in terms of if you write a book, what you want to get out of that book, if you do want it published, and what route you want to take.
Thank you. I think it wasn't luck, I think it was skill and expertise that got you published.
Hiya. I was just wondering, when you're creating your characters, how you kind of flesh them out so that they're actually believable people from like a kind of 2D idea into being like sort of 4D.
Well, again, it goes back to before I write a book, I spend a lot of time thinking about the book, about the plot, about the characters. And kind of going back to your point as well, I do spend a lot of time writing in notepads. I love the physical making notes and filling notepads with stuff. So I'll do all these wee kind of like biographies of the characters, what kind of traits I've got, what they look like physically, what are their family dynamics, and sometimes there might be bits of myself in a character, and sometimes there might be wee bits that you steal from other people you know, and you don't tell them that, but unless they recognise themselves in the character. So it's really just, I think, spending time with those characters in your head for quite a while before you actually set about writing the story. I think that's what works for me anyway.
So you say you write, oh, sorry, that's a bit loud. You say you write a lot of stories, and obviously you did a book that was different from your usual series. So how do you get, like, if you start writing a book and then you get ideas for another one, how do you stick by the one that you've actually, like, planned out instead of just moving on to the more interesting one?
I think that you've hit the nail on the head. This is something that writers talk about all the time. It's you come up with an idea and you're really excited, and you start writing it, and this idea's went through all the kind of pitching with agents and editors, and by the time you come to write it, you're right, you've got a million other shiny, newer, more exciting ideas, and it is just a case of you have to just put those ones aside, put them in the ideas file, and they'll still be there. Hopefully maybe a year down the line, they might still be shiny and exciting when it comes to the next one. But yeah, it's definitely so. You ask any writer, and they'll always tell you that you feel like you want to kind of like cheat on the book that you're writing with the sexy new idea, and it's just a case of you have to just put it to one side, and if it's good enough, you can come back to it and it'll still be there.
Have you got a pile then of notebooks basically that are all different stories? I'm going to maybe write that one or do this one, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a total stationery geek anyway, so any excuse to buy nice notepads and pens and just fill them with stuff. And also like rip stuff out of magazines. So if I have like a kind of an ideas file of like interesting news stories or
This
things
is so
in magazines.
worrying actually, because I've suddenly realised you and I are very similar. I've got a notebook in my bag that's filled with ideas and clippings from the newspaper and magazines and things for future ideas and future features and things.
And I do the same on Twitter as well, because you can bookmark things on Twitter. So even if it's an interesting picture or an interesting story, or again, it could be a photograph or something, just go, I'll store that away. That might pop up again at some point, and it might lead to a future book.
Mm-hmm. Have we got any questions from the internet?
I don't believe so.
No, that's fine. Okay, so what would you say has been your career highlight so far, Lisa?
Oh,
Dens Park? Pittodrie?
Maybe Dens Park and a wet Wednesday night, maybe not. I think probably the career highlight, other than the first book getting published and seeing how well people responded to that book, was maybe a big moment for me was the point when I decided I'm going to take the leap and I'm going to do this full time and give up the football and the glamorous wet Wednesday nights at Dens Park and
the dry rope
and Pittodrie, because at that point I was working at the Daily Record. I wasn't actually, to be fair, I wasn't actually working as a football journalist at that point. I was more a kind of office-based job in the Daily Record, but I knew at that point it was really the books that I wanted to do. So I think just being able to do that as your job and say that's your job, making up stories and hopefully making people happy and entertaining them with the books, I think that's been the highlight.
Great. Sorry, did we have another question? Sorry.
Yeah, hiya. I take you back a wee bit. I'm also halfway through the Jessica Shaw series and thoroughly enjoying it, I have to say, but very surprised that it wasn't actually based in locally. And I wondered again about, you've already explained a bit about American things, and that was really interesting, but two things struck me. One, would you ever think about basing characters locally? And secondly, I was really struck in the books about how I'd never been to America, but it felt very accurate in terms of your terminology and your explanation of things, and all the rest of it was very, very American. And I thought that was really interesting. I wondered again just where that all kind of came from.
I suppose it's one of those ones when you start out and you think it will just be as simple as changing the boot of the car to the trunk and biscuits to cookies and things like that, and then you realise there's quite a lot more to it. It's not even just the words, it's the way Americans phrase things differently. It is a whole different way of life to the UK. So it did take a kind of lot of research. I think a lot of it you kind of pick up from like reading books set in America, watching movies and TV shows. But I'm also quite lucky that I do have editors that work on the book that are American, and quite often they'll pick me up on wee things and they'll say, oh, that's a Britishism, and sometimes it's even, that's a Scottishism, I think. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't think Americans would understand what that is, so it can be quite tricky, but I'm really lucky that I do have people that kind of go through the manuscript and kind of help in that respect. In terms of writing a book in Scotland or even Glasgow, definitely I would love to do that one day. I think it's just, I need the right story and the right characters for that setting. And with The Darkroom, I did actually think, could this be the book that was maybe going to be set in Glasgow? Because again, Glasgow and New York can be quite similar in the respect that they can be quite dark and noir type places. So I did consider it for The Darkroom, and I felt best to stick with the American setting for this one, but just change it from California to New York. But definitely I would love to do a book set in Scotland, and then I could properly call myself a tartan noir author. I'm not sure if I can yet.
Well, I think you can call yourself a noir writer, and tartan that you're at least Scottish, and you
Maybe
are writing in Scotland.
In it. Although all the books seem to have a main character that likes to drink Scotch, and that's my wee nod to Scotland in it, and I always make sure that whiskey is spelled without an E in it, because the American editors keep trying to change it to spelling it with an E, and I'm like, no, we go with the Scottish spelling.
Another question, right?
Hi, what's your favourite book you've written, and why is it your favourite?
Are you allowed one? Are you allowed to have a favourite child?
It is. It's like picking a favourite child, isn't it? I don't know what kind of...
Let's be honest, everybody's got a favourite child. All those people that say they don't have a favourite child, they're just living a lie.
That's a good question, and it probably changes like with each new book that comes out. That's maybe the favourite one because it's like the new current one that's foremost in your mind. But if you were really going to nail me down and make me pick one, I think I'd probably pick Dark Highway. So I don't know if anybody that's read that book, there's a character in that book called Dee Morgan, and I don't know, for some reason she really just stuck with me, and she really got under my skin and affected me, I think, more than any other character in any of the other books. And again, that was a book where the ending came as a surprise. I changed the ending based on events that happened in the book. So if I had to be really nailed down, I'd go for Dark Highway.
Hi, can I ask, have you ever written any short stories?
I've written a few, but not that many. I actually find short stories really quite hard to write. I find them harder to write than a full-length novel. I think just because you have that short space in terms of to tell a full story and to flesh out the characters. So actually it was the first year of Bloody Scotland, entered a short story, and they had a short story anthology, and mine was one of the, I like to say I was one of the finalists. There was 20 finalists, so it's not quite as impressive as like I wasn't like number one or two. And actually get back to the lady's point about writing Scottish stuff, I did a short story, I think it was last year maybe, for the Daily Record. So that was a Glasgow set one, and it was set in the 60s during the Hurricane Low-Q, the storm of January 1968. So it was a woman who took the storm as an opportunity to get revenge on someone. So that was good fun to write, and I really loved it. Again, doing something a wee bit different, that it was a Scottish one. So I suppose like the short story was good in that respect. It allowed me to do something different.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you what you're going to do next, but you sort of said you've got another book that's coming out.
Yes, I don't know how much I can say about this yet, because we don't have the description or cover or anything up on Amazon. So I think it's going to be maybe August next year. It's called To Die For. It's a standalone, and it's partly set in Hollywood and partly set in Malibu.
You're determined to get to America, aren't you?
I'm determined to get to Malibu. So I'm just trying to think how much I can say. It's inspired by a very well-known reality TV show, but I threw a murder in. Obviously.
I think many people have been watching reality TV thinking that might help.
Well, this was the thing, when you're in lockdown, you've got nothing to do but sit for 8 hours watching Netflix, and then you start to look at these things and say, oh, that could be a motive for murder. And then you worry about yourself and think, why is my mind going to those places? But then it ended up turning into an idea for a book. So
now, one of the questions I usually ask the sort of musicians who come and talk to myself is, if you're doing these festivals, etc., have you got a rider for your room? You know, we were hearing about Liz Truss and the fancy sandwiches and the chilled white wine and, you know, little dogs, anything like that have got to be in the room?
I don't even have a room. If I'm lucky, I get a goodie bag with maybe a wee bottle of gin and an author pass that I can sneak into some of the other events. So maybe one day, if I'm as famous as Ian Rankin or Val McDermott, I might be able to demand like the Skittles that are all like the red ones
all
or something.
The red ones,
yeah.
That's it, yeah. Okay, I think we're ready to wind up. Is that all right? So we would like to thank the Year of Stories 2022 Community Stories Fund for helping with tonight's event. The fund is being delivered in partnership by Visit Scotland, Museums and Galleries Scotland, with support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, with thanks to the National Lottery players. This has been supported by Scottish Book Trust Live's Literature Programme with funding. And if you missed the previous event with Christopher Brookfire on the Healthy and Happy YouTube channel, please subscribe. Many thanks to Lisa for being with us today, and I heartily recommend Dark Room. It's a great book, brilliant stories. I'm sure you've all really enjoyed tonight, and thank you so much for being here.